Hello, and welcome back to Bitwig. Today, let's build unusual envelopes. Now, our last tutorial was really a boot camp going through exercises with ADSR, which is prominent in so many places and variations of it, which assumes the keyboard will get pressed, we'll start the attack phase, the keyboard will be released, we'll start the release phase, and that there's all these relationships with particular notes. Let's break some part of that in each of the examples we're going to look at today and try to find some unusual, nice places that might benefit different parts of your music. So we're going to go through a few different examples and try them out in some amount of detail, including, yes, some MSEG stuff, and yes, building some grid things at the end. So let's dive right in. If you are not viewing organ as an additive synthesizer sometimes, then you haven't given organ the chance it deserves. So let's begin. One idea, and we'll start the normal way first. If I go into the envelope category of our modulators, there's several choices here. A few of them we're going to look at today, including the note sidechain choice. Now, by default, the note sidechain is already connected to the device input, and it's allowing us to push different things down or up. Let's just play around, make things adjust. This is why organ can be a really nice example for dealing with modulators, because you can quickly make something that is not at all an organ. Now, this is nice, this is traditional. This is an ADSR, which is totally fine, but it happens to be working inside of organ, using the same notes that are triggering it. Now, example number one, let's try separating so that different notes are actually what's triggering the envelope here, so that the notes playing the organ are not the same notes that are triggering this envelope. And that's what the note sidechain modulator is good for. I have the second track here, which is, of course, a kick drum. There it goes. And with the nature of this note sidechain input, if I went ahead and said, well, in that group, I have a kick, I see it triggering. It's good to see that where the triggers are coming from. Maybe that's what I want to cue that envelope. Now, again, this is a control signal. The audio signal is being queued up when the notes are actually played on this track so that the organ will make sound. So if I hit stop and I play, I get the organ just by itself. But once I hit play, so now my triggers are coming from some place else. Now, a couple interesting ideas here that we could work with. Number one, and funny enough, note sidechain is the only envelope modulator that happens to have a velocity sensitivity control built right into it up there. So that if we just open this up, it will make the envelope more sensitive to the velocity of the notes coming in. So we'll end up getting some, can we see it? Differentiation. There we go. You know what? While we're here, let's make this a little more interesting for a moment. Let's revisit the idea of operators, because we do have a note repeat operator. So if this became longer, it doesn't change the sound of it playing, it's just triggering a kick drum, until we go over into this operators section and say, well, there's two ways I can go. I can go down and pick a rhythmic interval, which, by the way, control clicking will give you some of your friendly, quick musical intervals you might want. I know everyone loves a 32nd or 48th note. Well, that's one way. Or if I go up above, now I'm just saying how many pieces to break this into. And I do have this central controller for where to adjust everything, so it can come more at the end. And this might be a case where bringing the target velocity, which does have a control here, down, because we have velocity sensitivity. That's not bad. And a nice little hidden control here with the repeats operator. If I hold Alt, I've got a curve icon, and now I can bend the curve of what's going on there. So maybe we bring it down a little bit more and have it just drop down velocity-wise more quickly. Oop. Now, that's not bad. It's also a little bit extreme. So just working with modulators for a minute, having the envelope there is awfully handy. Having it trigger some from a different source is unique and lets us already separate out a sound. I could even mute this kick drum track and just get that rhythmic element from these notes that are sequenced. That would work too. But what I might want to do, if you think about envelopes, all they really are, they're kind of just fades. They're saying I want to transition in and out. I want to bring a level up and then back down. And most of the modulators that we have actually have an output control, a level control, which might be a very good target for an envelope indeed. So I could go with LFO, I normally do. Let's call in Wavetable LFO because that's a little bit fun. Now, what I'm tempted to do, quick reminder, if I'm viewing the entire organ, and you see pitch 12 is spilling a lot of options there, I have all of these routings under note sidechain, and I now have Wavetable LFO as a modulation source as well, which currently has no modulation routings or mappings. So if I drag note sidechain down to Wavetable LFO, hey, that was quick. Now I have my LFO going already. Except, of course, what I want to do with Wavetable LFO is instead of working in hertz, I'd like it to go at about the speed of each note. Oh, not hold, pitch. Let's bring that down. That's fully open. That's a lot. That's a lot of different amplitude modulation on each of these sine waves, each of these partials. So instead, now I still want to use the envelope. I want to bring the output of Wavetable LF all the way down and then assign this envelope I've created to it. So now no sound change until those other envelopes, those other notes from the other track start playing. So why not? 2 or 3 different ideas in there, all wrapped up by using envelopes in a different way, by having them trigger from a different source. Now, a second idea or example, how about instead of note on triggering each of the notes, let's use note off to trigger, not to trigger the notes, to trigger the envelope. What if we use note off instead? So I already have a little sound here. I like things that get thin or kind of disappear at a certain point. So the tricky bit here is I'm using the steps modulator. I could draw whatever if I want to hear it more, if I want to hear it less. And I set it to poly, which is not always the case with the steps. Oh, here we go, the per voice control up there. So once I turn that on, each individual note, and since this is in the note restart mode, we'll get restarting it over and over again, so I can have these kind of polyphonic patterns instead of the flat synchronized steps like you normally get. By the way, if you're in one of these drawing type places like the steps modulator or module, it can be very nice. There are some hidden menus here. I right click on the back. I could transform this to change my pattern around, to reverse it, to normalize it. Yes, I can click these buttons to offset it to be the timing I want. Or in this case, I want to generate, as the name might suggest here, I'd rather have a little Fibonacci because that would not be fun to draw. So whatever step count I've got, this will paint in values. Cool. So that's working already. Now the thing is, with this sound, I'm animating something in oscillator 1 and something in oscillator 2. So you see both waveforms updating and changing, but right now I'm only listening to oscillator 1. It almost sounds like reverb already. So maybe this is something I'd like to use on release that gets triggered in that time. So if I go to the envelope modulator category again, I have AHD on release, which is already hinting to me that at note off, that is when this envelope will do something. And sure enough, if I hold a chord, those dots aren't moving until I let go. Then I see them fly up. So I can go ahead, take this, and maybe it's on release that I'd like to shift the balance from oscillator 1 towards oscillator 2 with that kind of reverby feel. Want to take a second and a half, hold there, maybe come back. Could even curve it a little bit. Why not? Now let's hear this not work. Aha, remember the interaction between audio signals and control signals. Control signals can be beautiful and do elegant things like our AHD on release is doing right now. If audio has ended, you will never know it. We need audio to be able to hear it. So in Polysynth over here, we do have our amplitude envelope generator that has a relatively quick release time, and that signal is ending before we go anywhere. So let's go ahead and bring up the release time. So now, when I let go of a note, I have a chance for each note to jump over into that place. And this is definitely polyphonic. The scopes, not so much, but everything that I hear on the way out, each note is being handled individually and is in its own position as it goes on. So this is a different idea of moving the trigger of each envelope until the release point, which is why this type of envelope doesn't have any sustain or anything. It's just going to run in a one-shot pattern, and it'll last as long as the audio allows it to run. Now, this whole idea of triggering on release can be rather interesting, and it is supported in some unexpected places. I have a little preset here from the goodly Claude Young, who has a bunch of nice sampler presets. Just a little bit of a monophonic bass going on. Now, you might notice in the sampler, it has a note effects chain, fair enough. It has an audio effects chain, and it happens to have a release chain. That anything in there, when you release each note, then it will send a regular note on. It's basically saying we're going to trigger whatever you've added into this chain at the release of each note. You can imagine for orchestral or realistic sounds, pianos, often there is a release sound of a piano that gets triggered. Like, oh, that's the hammer releasing from the felt and the dampers pushing back on. I have a recording of that and I want to trigger it when I let go. That's one way. Let's do something different here. Let's just have fun. This is a release chain. I obviously want a test tone, which is an audio effect. There it is. Because test tone has white noise. And I'm going to turn the gain all the way down. And might as well have the mix all the way up because I don't want any dry signal here. Now what I want is something synthetic to add to this sampler instrument. I want a little bit of a noise wash to come at the end of each note. Of course, test tone has no envelope, so I will add one. Let's add an ADSR, and let's make it move the gain up. Maybe not all the way. And as stated before, this is really a one-shot case. It's just going to trigger a note on that waits and holds as long as the sampler has defined it, by the way. Over here in the inspector for sampler, we have the release chain and, oh, how long should this note last for and whose velocity should it use? Well, for most keyboards, the note on velocity is a much more reliable source than the note off velocity, the release velocity, if that's being sent. So I'll just use that and pair it together. And why should velocity matter? Well, why is white noise going to matter? Before we even hear it, I'm just going to go throw in an old easy filter module maybe, and just say that I'm getting notes here. They have velocity. If I want velocity, I started typing it. I found expressions. I want the velocity of each note to adjust the cutoff. Let's say a range of 3 octaves. Okay, now again, this is a very one-shot case. The release chain is just getting a note on of a fixed length and then it goes away. So non-sustaining is probably going to be better in this case, and then just adjust the decay time to taste. Oh, that tastes long. And it's not bad. Do we want to play with it a little bit? Maybe let's try rotary, make it spin a bit. Nice. And I know the last question you have, does everything in the regular effects chain process, including the release chain? I think the answer is yes. Let's test it. If I drop the rotary here instead, that's not such a mono bass anymore. It's a rotary bass. But if it goes back, oh, I missed. If it goes back into the release chain, nice. Okay, so the idea of on release is something you could do either with the modulator for on release or with the sampler, or there's a note length module as well, which lets you trigger things separately in case you wanted to layer things up. One separate idea for half a second, but it's very related. We see that until I let go of the notes, this is not moving. It's interesting that most of the regular envelope modulators also have a different idea. It's one thing to say trigger at note on. It's one thing to say trigger at note off, which is the on release case. But let me just assign another little modulation here. It's a different idea to say I want a pre-delay, which several of these envelope modulators have, which is saying right now, 4/16 notes, a quarter note later, based on your current tempo, maybe we go 8/16 notes, then start the envelope, which gives you a nice idea of, again, separating not exactly the notes that are triggering the sound, but something else. And there are plenty of examples in the library, including some organ type ideas and other things that do make this very clear. So just this one cumulonimbus, cloudy one for a moment, if I hold a few notes. You see all those envelopes triggering at different times. Yeah. So again, what note is triggering each of these things, when they are actually firing off, those are different things that can be controlled and have an interesting result. Number 3, if we're counting, there is another envelope here that is incredibly simple, which can always be misleading. Ramp. Ramp is just a tiny square. It has no extra panel, but it's got a bunch of parameters in that little control space. So if I start here with ramp, when I play a note, each note will go in a straight line ramp for the time that you've set it to. Or again, you could do a metronome. How many 16th notes would you like it to represent? Kind of place. You could do that as well. Now, why would you want a straight line? Oh, there's plenty of cases where programming an envelope to be a straight line, you can kind of do it, but you have to fake it, and it becomes a bit of a mess. One case I would think of might be a wavetable type oscillator. So let's just kill the filter for now. If I click on the wavetable, I'm going to have a few different options. I do love my sines by harmonic, but right now I want something acoustic, something that might start busier and then die out. If I want to hear the animation of this sound, it's one thing to drag the fader, and it's one thing to hear the individual steps, which sound completely digital, of course. But even dragging the fader isn't really smooth enough. So how about I turn on the ramp and I make it push just the whole length. Get out, sub. And now it starts to, I can kind of hear that, especially for these acoustic type wavetables, that might be an animated sound that was captured. That's interesting. Of course, I like things that get even quieter and flatter. Ooh, at the back. That's a nice Rhodes. Ooh, that's very flat. I like silence too much. We're going with this. So ramp could be enough for this. And once you get into this place of, oh, it's doing what I like, maybe I curve it. Which is already changing the sound quite a bit. Now, what if I turn on a loop control and make this something totally different altogether? As long as everything is unified, you will get that fixed pattern. If you take something as simple as velocity to modulate the time, then it's going to be a little out of sync, kind of like a Fibonacci runner example was before. And that can be interesting too. Now, one thing not to sleep on with, and I'll turn off looping because that was... One thing that is nice with ramp is you don't get many envelope generators that have an inspector parameter to say ignore notes. So if you're ignoring notes, and this is an envelope, it must have some other means of controlling it. And in this case, what you could use is this direction control. So, if you follow me, what if it wasn't even notes triggering your envelope? What if you had something totally different triggering your envelope? Now, I'm going to jump over. I have a nice little reverb here on a send track with nothing being received. We just want the polymer. Cool. Now, what have I done? I have a ramp that is modulating wet gain. Now, right now, it is turned on. What I could do is simply assign a button that now I can use it anytime I want. Oh, I modulated in the wrong direction. To flip that off or on. Not as much wet gain. A lot more wet gain. Maybe I need the kick drum back from earlier. But whatever's coming in here will start covering up and filling the gaps because I've increased the reverb. Now, what I like for this is there is this modulator called globals, which gives a few parameters, whether the fill button is being pressed or not, back to operators and connecting to that idea. This current status of the global crossfade, if you happen to be using that on the mixer. And very interestingly, the transport playing, which a lot like in the grid is just saying, is it playing? Yes. Cool, now it's turned on. And this playing right now is mapped to the flip button, the invert button on the ramp. So the transport's playing, I have a certain amount of reverb. I can play the other sound too, maybe bring it up. And then when the transport stops, I kind of smoothly cranked up the reverb so that now it'll kind of fill the gaps. Just a nice little performance trick there. And the idea that ramp is something that could have a control map to it, just for that flip button business, that'll let you say, oh, trigger it this way. This is the attack. Oh, now trigger it this way. This is the release. However you've got it configured, it's worth looking into. And it can be a very nice trick. Now, yes, let's turn off our ramp for a moment because we have reached the moment of truth. If I type MSEG, I get several of these BW curve devices. One is an envelope called Segments. Go figure. Now, it's easy to think that the best thing you can do, and again, I'm going to use my little trick. I've got ramp is mapped to index, I'm going to drag that mapping over to segments. And now segments is mapped to index. I can see it working already. Now, it's easy to think of segments as a way to just draw very specific freehand patterns, and that is one way of looking at it. But it can be a lot more interesting than that. There are other reasons that make it useful, and I think we're going to go through about 5 of them real quick. One thing is, I'm going to go and turn this to its default looping mode, its default play mode, which happens to be one-shot. So I've got a one-shot option, I've got a hold option, and I've got a couple looping options. Now, looping is obviously unique here. Our other envelopes didn't have that except for ramp, which was just straight line looping. So let's try something. If I trigger it now, hold down the note, it's a one-shot. Doesn't matter how long the key's held down. And again, we're getting into this audio control interaction business. The audio is ending before the control signal's ending. Let go. Okay, then it kind of is fading out at the same time. But I want to be even simpler than that for a minute. We've already looked at a bunch of types of envelopes, so I want to get rid of a couple of these points and try something even simpler. Haha. What do I have? I am in one-shot mode. This is an AD envelope like we saw before. When I trigger a note, it's going to go through its cycle. And even if I release a note, it's going to go through its cycle, whether I hear the end of it or not. I could extend that release one more time. I made an AD envelope. Now, what's different? Well, I'm not constrained the way I was before. What if I just want to grab the level and say, no, you're not going to maximum. I'll leave the modulation range wherever it was. It was maximum over there. I'll control it from here because maybe it feels better to stay in the one place and draw it. So now it won't go quite as close to silence in the middle of the sound every time. Now, I also had AR as an option, and I think hold was pretty essential for AR. Look, I have a little segment now, and I can drag it around freely and say, hey, guess what? That's the hold point. And when I let go, that will be the release point. If I don't hold it down long enough to finish the attack, it'll jump like you expect. So I've defined where the release happens. I mean, yes, of course, you could have 50 more segments over here. I know this is very important, but we're fine without it. Once I've done that, well, it seems like we're getting kind of close. Ooh, this looks a bit like ADSR, doesn't it? Because it is. That's exactly where we've landed. And that's pretty cool and interesting. But now, let's get to that point. Let's not discount the idea of looping. So now, let's say I want to move my loop region to be over here. That's nice, and that's something I couldn't achieve with other envelopes unless I used multiple modulators, unless I also used LFO, and then good luck trying to make that only trigger in the sustain phase. That would be pretty difficult. If I wanted to loop around the other way, yes, I have the ping-pong palindrome mode. I'm going to draw funny curves. I hold Alt, add Shift. That didn't feel terrible. Now, what are these timing units? Let's take a look for 1 minute. I see a big 1 up here. And interestingly, I can zoom out and see a 2, 3, 4 and start drawing that way if I want. I'll double click to get it back in frame. 1 what? Well, my current timing unit, because segments is very simple, each of these curve devices is very simple, is 1 bar. Now there's 2 things here that are interesting. One, it's allowing metronome-based units, which other than ramp, I think, we didn't see that in any of the other envelopes. So just having it clearly right now, I'm in 4/4, this is the length of a bar, 1/4 of a bar is a quarter note. I have perfect quarter note sync right now, and each segment, if I were to draw it there, would line up nicely. Now, additionally, having this single control instead of an attack time, a decay time, a release time for all the speed parameters is very nice. If I wanted to make a meaningful control, I could just make a single macro knob called speed that goes up and down a little bit, and then just map it here. And now no matter what stage of the envelope I'm in, my one control is affecting the entire relative speed. And that can be very nice, whether it's a meaningful control for this preset, or if I just want to map velocity to it, or something else. So yes, we can remap different shapes and we can break them. Yes, we can use beat-based options. Yes, we can have single controls for manipulating things cleanly and making good presets. Yes, we have these looping options. And finally, don't discount smoothing. Smoothing is an option here that can be very interesting. So it's on by default because maybe you want to smooth your shape just a bit, but this has quite a range. 0.1 milliseconds up to 10 seconds. Okay, that's a lot. The interesting thing about smoothing is that I can use it to make an evolving shape over time. And now my sound is not starting exactly in the same place, but it will slowly push there. That's pretty nice in different contexts. Maybe I have this backwards. Maybe I want to start from silence and go back. Remember the trick from steps. If I right-click in the background of an editor like this, then I do have some transform options, and maybe I just want to flip this vertically so that I start on the quiet side and I move towards the louder side because of the nature of this shape. Could bring down smoothing. Maybe that should be part of my rate control. Maybe I should just have it nudging both a bit. There's a lot of ways to work, and it goes pretty far beyond just saying I want to draw a shape. So finally, a twist, and I'd like to do it in the grid. So starting with the default patch here, other than deleting the modulators, I like Sawtooth. Ooh, that'll be less loud when there's a filter. I want to switch to the normal Sawtooth oscillator for a moment, and maybe we should see the spectrum will help us. What I want to do here is to make the idea of envelope different in terms of different notes that are being played in the same stream being used differently in a single patch. So I'm going to start with this normal patch. Maybe we'll add a filter in here. Let's go Oberheimy with the XP. Now, remember, we did this before with our pitch lesson. If I type in C3, it will set the frequency very helpfully. And now both the filter, which does have keyboard tracking. So if I disable keyboard tracking on the oscillator, everything will still be triggered. Perhaps, let's see the sawtooth. Let's see the filter as well. Because at a certain point, the filter is just deciding how much we hear different harmonics. Maybe I want it a little bit less steep. High pass 1, low pass 2. Okay, cool. Now, one thing I want to change, and here's a little bit of a tricky part. Let's go with polygrid. We have these retrigger options for all of the polyphonic instruments. New notes are always retriggering the envelope and creating a nice short burst right now. We see it in the ADSR, and we hear it where it's jumping back up. Well, right now, for the nature of what I want to do, I want to turn off retriggering. So it's still going to work. It's just when I play different notes, it's not making that extra burst to restart everything. Okay, so far, so good. Maybe it would be helpful to see a mini keyboard on screen, since we don't have room for the pitch 12. Cool. Now we've got that. The problem with turning it off for the sawtooth altogether, key tracking, is that I have now lost the ability to tune the oscillator. And if I'm playing this with my hand, even if I'm playing multiple notes, I might want to decide where the oscillator starts. So a few different options. As long as I bring the pitch in separately, I/O category, pitch in, come into the oscillator, open the oscillator attenuator all the way so that pitch will perfectly land in the right place. Pitch signal is very finicky. You don't want it to land in weird places. This is like I had it a minute ago. The difference is I now have this signal and I have some processing options. Before we even get to processing, if I look at the pitch in module, it has these note priority options within it for deciding which note should be triggering. We're kind of getting into this voice logic territory now of different signals representing different notes, etc., etc. If I stuck with lowest, this will kind of work. So that the pitch of the oscillator is being defined by the lowest note played, but that's not really what I want. What I want is that the pitch getting to the oscillator is simply the first note played. So just some really light processing. Let's go back to default. So all pitches are coming in. And now maybe instead of just the pitch signal, we need their friend, the gate signal. Because the gate signal here should, since retriggering is stayed off, simply stay high as long as the note is being played. And that would be a really great way for the level category to process the pitch by sampling and holding it. Let's process it in both places. So now, even if I played lower notes, which is a little bit silly, but I have the option. It's nice to have options. Now, what might make this a little bit handy and get us closer to a Tuvan throat singing, as the old saying goes, is to, what if we bring down the octave of the oscillator so there are more frequencies to play with? The harmonics are now closer together. And we could also bring up an octave the filter. So now, and if you wanted to go even more octaves, it'll just mean your 2-octave keyboard now has even more range. Those harmonics start getting quite close together. But there you go. We've looked at a lot of examples separating the note source that can trigger an envelope to a different track, separating the time of a note that can trigger an envelope, whether it becomes the release that starts it or delays it from the beginning. We've looked at the reasons that something like segments is interesting beyond drawing it. And there's this voice logic idea of taking it into the grid and separating notes out, which could go in a lot of different directions. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time.